this one. Okay. Good afternoon, class. Now it's already 2 p.m. Can you turn on the webcam for a while? Okay, we already have, so there are 27 participants joining us today on the guest lecture. Okay. Okay. So perhaps we will, Miss Danica, we will start with the group photo session before we continue with, okay. Okay, everyone, please turn on the webcam. 1, 2. Okay, Santa, Pinka, Karis, Lydia, Deva. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So, yeah. Now, if you still want to turn on the webcam, it's fine. But if you want to turn it off, it's also possible. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's guest lecture with Miss Danica Hanna. Hello, Miss Danica. Welcome to Indonesia.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, Dr. Eva, and to the class.
And the title of Miss Danica's presentation today is Multilingual Situation in the Philippines. So as we know that multilingual is actually a very challenging topic, and because of the complexity, and also there are various aspects involved in the multilingualism. So that's why today's lecture will be very interesting for us. And before we start, I would like to read a short bio of Miss Danica Hanna. Right. Miss Danica Hanna, a pastor, yeah. She was born on 1992, and she is now 29, and the citizenship of Filipino. She graduated from Mariano Marcos State University, the Philippines, and for the postgraduate is from the University of the Philippines. And she attended various seminars or trainings or conferences. And one of them is Learning and Teaching Grammar for a Purpose, Barriers, Bridges, and Breakthrough. And also work experiences is now instructor in Mariano Marcos State University, College of Arts and Sciences. And her research was about the level of readiness and acceptance for e-learning, the case of MMSU. And she also had published a book of abstracts, which was the evaluation of collaborative learning tasks in senior high school literature textbook. And what is this? Inayan, Ano Bayan? An attempt to understand the concept of Inayan. Okay, so that's the short bio of Miss Danica. So before we move on, I would like to give a friendly reminder that this lecture will be divided into 2 sections. There will be 30 until 40 minutes of presentation from Ms. Danica, and it will be followed by 20 minutes of discussion, so question and answer session. Should you have any question during the presentation, you could leave the question in the chat box. Please don't forget to mention your name. Without further ado, please welcome our speaker, Ms. Danica Hanna Apastor. Ms. Danica, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eva, for inviting me to serve as a guest lecturer in your class this afternoon. I am also delighted to see your students who are here, and hopefully our discussion, they will learn a lot, and by their questions, we will able to bond with them more. So let me just share my screen so that we can start with our lecture for this afternoon.
Okay.
Kindly tell me if you already see it.
Yes, we
All
can
right.
see it clearly.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So feel free to, so I have made my PowerPoint presentation or my guest lecture as an interactive one. So which means that later on, I might be asking some questions to our students, and they are free to comment or unmute their microphone or put their answers on the chat box. So I am seeing some of them here on my screen. You may raise your hand so that I could recognize you later on. So good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I am Danica Hanna Pastor from the Mariano Marcos State University, and I was given the chance to deliver a lecture regarding multilingualism. So my lecture for this afternoon, I titled it as Multilingual Situation in the Philippines, a Sneak Peek. So just an outline of what we will be discussing this afternoon. We'll have first understanding multilingualism, so revisiting what is the concept of multilingualism. And then the second one will be what are the different causes of multilingualism in the Philippines. And then after that, briefly, there are so many effects and implications of a multilingual society, but I'll just be focusing on two important aspects. And then the last one will be a summary in which I might be asking one student to somehow summarize what I have shared or the key points that I was able to give from the previous lectures or from the previous items in here. So let's start. So for the first one, which is understanding multilingualism or revisiting the concept of what multilingualism is. So before that, how many languages do you speak? So kindly in the chat box, you may want to answer this question, or somebody may want to raise his or her hand and tell me how many languages do you actually speak. So I'll be waiting for your answers in the chat box. Can you give me a number of how many languages do you or can you speak? So a while ago, maybe I'll be asking somebody who is or whose camera is open. Farida, Andresta, how many languages do you speak? Can you unmute your mic?
Maybe
Two?
but
All right.
now
What?
yeah, but now I'm learning a Filipino language.
Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you. So what are these three languages? So one is Filipino, another one is,
Japanese language
and the third one, I
and
believe.
Indonesia.
All right, good. But you can also speak English, so that makes it four. Okay, I guess. So you speak Indonesian, you speak Japanese, then you're trying to speak in Filipino, Philippine language, and then you could also speak English. All right, so that makes it four. So in the chat box, I could see Nova, two languages, Balinese and Indonesian. And then in the here could speak three, Japanese, Balinese, and English. So aside from Andresta, who has other languages, or aside from those that were mentioned, who can speak five languages? Or five would be, if you already can speak five languages, then that means that you're already a polyglot, or you could speak various languages. All right, so most of our students here, you could still post or chat or put your answers in the chat box. Let's just have one more before we proceed to the next one. So can you pass the ball or can you call another classmate, Andresta? Can you call one of your classmates to answer my question?
Maybe Gus Rama.
Gusrama, okay. Gusrama Nanda, can you please unmute your microphone, please? How many languages could you speak?
Um, I can speak 3 languages: the Balinese language, Japan language, and English language. But
All right.
Japanese is so a little bit harder.
Okay.
Uh,
All right. So he could also speak 3 Balinese, Indonesian, and Japanese language, or did I hear English too? So there are 3 languages that he could speak. So just to be fair, I also would like to share. So maybe I could speak fluently in 3 languages. So that's my native language, Ilocano. So our national language, Filipino, and our second language, which is English. So many years ago, I officially learned Mandarin language. And then I also had a course in Spanish language when I had my master's in the University of the Philippines. So I'm not so fluent with the last 2 languages, but somehow if I'm given the chance to train again, then I may be able to speak the language. So I also can speak 3 fluently. So it's a tie for all of us. So in relation to multilingualism, it's usually interchanged or connected to the concept of bilingualism. So if we're going to define bilingualism just by looking into the different components of the word, so if we're going to divide it, it has several suffixes or affixes, a prefix, and a suffix. So we have your bi, lingual, and ism. So when we say bi, it's 2. And when we use the suffix ism, it talks about the act or practice or the use. So when we put it all together, when we say bilingualism, it's the knowledge and use of 2 languages. But then, if we're going to understand or we want to understand it further, there are several authorities that have shared what the meaning of bilingualism is. So can I hear one by one? So I guess let me call another person. Gusrama, can you please name one of your classmates once again?
Maybe Gede Sumitra.
All
Okay.
right. Please. Sumitra,
Okay,
please.
Miss. Okay,
Can you
Miss.
please read the first one, first definition?
Okay, bilingualism, number 1, equal mastery or the native-like control of
All
2
right, thank you
languages.
very much, Sumitra.
You're welcome.
So the first one is equal mastery or the native-like control of 2 languages. So when we say native-like, when you speak, for example, in Japanese language, do you believe that you already have a native-like control? So for example, my native language is Ilocano. So whenever I speak Ilocano, I don't have to think that much, right? For example, you as well. If you're going to speak in Bahasa or in Indonesian language, then you don't need to think so much. So there is no conscious effort when you talk in your native language. So now when you speak in Japanese, do you also have that capacity or do you also have that experience that you don't have already any difficulty in speaking the language? So if that is the case, then you could be considered a bilingual because aside from your native language, you could also speak with ease or fluency with the Japanese language. So the second one is the complete mastery of 2 different languages without interference between the 2 linguistic processes. So what do you usually do if you want to speak in Japanese? So sometimes we first have our thoughts in our native language, right? And then after that, we try to translate these concepts or words into the Japanese language. So from our native language, we translate this into our target language, which is Japanese. But then bilingualism would say that sometimes the structure of these two languages that we have, our native language and our target language, for example, Japanese, are not actually the same. So do they interfere with each other? Or do you have the capacity that your native language could not interfere with your second language? So I will be explaining that later on with a certain example in the next slide. And then the last one is the ability to produce complete, meaningful utterances in other language. So may I ask somebody from the group, Wulandari, Miss Wulandari, do you believe that you already have learned many vocabulary in Japanese?
Yes.
How many words? Could you give me an estimate of how many words could you already, or do you think from level 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, what level are you in terms of your fluency in the Japanese language? So
I don't know what's my level. I think 4 grade.
4? Did I hear 4? So there might be a possibility that with the length of experience or instruction of Japanese, you already have learned so many words in the Japanese language. But then being a bilingual is not just knowing or having many vocabulary, but being able to use or knowing how to use these words, for example, in sentences. So again, I would like to repeat, it's not just about being able to know many words in another language, but it's the ability on how to use these words in certain contexts or utterances. So let's try looking into this example. So this one is in English and in the Mandarin language. So when you say you are beautiful, so when I translate it, I will be doing it word for word. So in the Mandarin language, you is translated to ni, and then are or any other linking verbs are translated roughly into sure. And then beautiful is piao yang. So when you are going to say it in Mandarin, it becomes ni sure, piao liang. So that is the translation of you are beautiful in Mandarin. However, that is not the case. So you don't translate it word for word because the linking verb are in the English language is not the same, or the use of the sure in the Mandarin language are not the same. So which means that when you are going to translate this one into Mandarin, you should be removing the sure in here because the sure is just used when the next word would be a noun. So if it's an adjective, for example, if it's beautiful or piaoliang in Mandarin, then it doesn't need the sure linking verb. So that means that it just becomes ni piaoliang. So no need of the sure or are equivalent in the English language. So if you have that capability that your first language is not interfering with the second language or another language that you're learning, then you can consider yourself as a bilingual. Aside from that, you should be able to know how to use the words correctly in certain utterances or contexts. So, you know, words have different connotations. So in the language, we have what we call denotative and connotative meaning. So connotative means the emotions that are being evoked when you hear of a particular word. For example, we have a neutral word, which is smell. But this has several synonymous words, which are odor, stench, aroma, and scent. So in the English language, when you make use of odor and stench, then it is of negative connotation. Because how is it usually used in sentences? So sometimes it says, there is an overwhelming stench in the room because of the garbage. So the word odor and stench are usually associated with garbage, and that is the reason why it has a negative connotation. But then when we hear of the word aroma or scent, this usually evokes positive meaning because it's used in this sentence. For example, there was a wonderful aroma coming from the small kitchenette. So you make use of aroma, scent, for things that are pleasing in smell. For example, the food that you're cooking or the scent, for example, of your cologne. So odor, stench, aroma, and scent are the same because they all pertain to smell, but then they have different connotations. So the first two would be negative, and the second two would be positive. So a person who is bilingual should also be able to know how to use these words correctly, and who then is considered as a bilingual. A person who uses two or more languages in their everyday, and it could also be a person who possesses a minimal competence on the four language skills, which are your listening, speaking, reading, and writing, other than his or her mother tongue. So sometimes many authorities say that you could only be considered as a bilingual if you are able to be fluent in another language. But in this definition, you could see that even if you already only have minimal competence in reading, writing, speaking, or listening, then you could already be considered as bilingual. So in relation to multilingualism, how are we going to define it? Practice according to Bianco and Arenin of 2020, multilingualism is the practice of using three or more languages and handling of more than two languages by some or all members of the society. So which means that a society is considered multilingual if most of its members could interchange the use of three or more languages. So now, do you that box? You just write yes or no. So now that you understand better what is bilingualism and multilingualism, do you consider yourself as a bilingual or a multilingual? So in the chat box, I will be waiting for your answer. Now that you know what is a bilingual and a multilingual person, do you consider yourself as one? So a while ago, I have asked you how many languages could you speak? So we have defined what a bilingual is and a multilingual is. A minimum competence according to the definition. So even if you don't know much, but you could speak, then you could still be considered as a bilingual or multilingual person. So in relation to that, according to Ang 1978, the concept of bilingualism and multilingualism are not an uncommon Filipino experience. So which means Philippines is a multilingual nation. And later on, I will be telling you why we are a multilingual nation or country. So that leads now to the second part of our outline, which is the causes of multilingualism in the Philippines. So the first one is colonization. So if you know about Philippine history, we have been colonized by several countries. So I have a little game for all of you. I will be showing you the flag and then you tell me what country is it. So you could just unmute your microphone or put your answer in our chat box. So one of our colonizers is this country. What is this? Are you familiar with this country? It starts with the letter S.
Spanish.
Spanyol.
Yeah, it's Spain.
Spanish.
Yes, correct. So the first colonizer, or we have been colonized by Spain. So before I explain that, let's just proceed to the next one. What's that country?
America.
United States.
America.
Yes, America, or the United States of America. And lastly,
Japan.
yes, Japan. All right. So I believe you're familiar with the last one because you are under the Japanese or the Japan language program. So just look at these three countries in here. Why are we a multilingual nation? Because of colonization. So for how many years? Look at that number. 1521 to 1898. Do the math. How many years have we been colonized by the Spain? It's a very long period of time. And after the Spaniards colonized the Philippines, here comes the Americans who colonized us from 1898 to 1946. And then after that, there is when a country is colonized, they bring with them not only the people, but of course they bring with them the language. That is the reason why when they stayed here in the Philippines, of course, the Filipinos were able to get some of their words. And let me show you some. So according to Marlon James Sales, a Philippine-born translator and linguist at the University of Michigan, most Filipinos don't realize that they're actually speaking Spanish. And he said that a third of the Filipino language were derived from Spanish words. Because of that, we have 4,000 borrowed words from the Spanish language. And one of this, I'll show you one. We have a word in Filipino, kumusta. So, kamusta. Kamusta in the English language means how are you? So in Spanish, it's como esta. Como esta is how are you? And then it became kamusta, which is also translated how are you? So in here, you could see that most of our words are actually from the Spanish language. All right. So if you want to know more what Filipino words are derived from the Spanish language, then here is a link if you're interested, filipinocastilla.com Hispani. All right, so that's where you could find some other Filipino words that were derived from the Spanish language. Now, you might be asking also, why do many Filipinos speak English? The reason is because of the American introduction of public education. So it was the Americans who introduced to us about the formal way of education or public education. And of course, when they introduced it to us, the medium of instruction is the English language. And don't you know, when I was in elementary, most of our textbooks are actually from United States. And that is the reason why sometimes we cannot understand some of the words in our textbooks because there are certain words that do not exist in our immediate environment. For example, we have reading materials that talk about snow, And we cannot relate what's a snow because in the Philippines, we don't have a snow. So Filipinos speak English, majority of which because the Americans taught us using the English language. And then according to Kirsten Daniels of 2016, I hope that you're interested in here, and I hope that you could help me in the translation. So in the Japanese language or in the Japanese occupation, there are also words in the Filipino language that were derived from the Japanese language. So the first one is jakenpon. What's the meaning of that? Is there anybody from the group who knows what this Japanese concept is all about? Jakenpon.
Yes, ma'am. I think it's about game using hands.
Thank you very much, Linda Yani. That's correct, jakenpon. So in the Philippines, we have a game which is jak and poi. And just like in the Japanese language, it's a game using hands, right? So our jak and poi is the version of the rock, paper, scissors of the Americans. So jak and pon, it became jak and poi in the Filipino language. We have another one, kanpai. What's the meaning of which?
It's like cheers.
Cheers. Yes, correct. So when you're drinking something, you say kanpai, right? Did I pronounce it correctly, Linda Yani? Kanpai?
Kanpai.
Kanpai. All right. So in the Filipino language, we have a derivation or we have it in our language. It became kampai, which also means to cheer or cheers when drinking. Okay, so that is where it was derived. So another one is dandan, dandan or dandan. I'm not sure on how to pronounce it. So what is the meaning of dandan in the Japanese language? Anybody from the group who's familiar with this concept or word, dandan?
Ma'am, I think it's little by little.
Yes, very good. So it's little by little. So which in the Filipino, it became dahan-dahan. From dandan of the Japanese language, it became dahan-dahan, which means little by little or slowly or gradually. So when we say that in Filipino, oh, dahan-dahan lang. So which means do it slowly or little by little. So that is how the word dahan-dahan evolved from the Japanese term dandan. So the last one, kaban. Kaban. What's the meaning of kaban from the Japanese language?
Bag, ma'am.
Back or no?
All right, very good. So you're familiar with this word. So kaban, did I pronounce it correctly? Kaban?
Habang.
Kabang.
Kaban.
Habang.
Kaban. Okay, kaban. Okay, so the kaban now is translated or it was adapted in the Filipino language, but the pronunciation is different. So you said it's kaban. So we now pronounce it in Filipino as kaban, which also means bag or sack. So we usually say kaban ng bigas, which is translated in the English language as a sack of rice or a bag of rice, for example. So you see, there are also Filipino words that were derived from the Japanese language, and that is the result of colonization. So some of our words were from Spanish, were from English, and from the Japanese language. And that is one of the reasons why Filipino Filipinos are multilingual because we were colonized by so many countries. So the second reason is the establishment of a national language. So in Indonesia, do you have a national language?
Yes, ma'am.
What's
It's
your
Yes.
national?
Indonesia.
Indonesia is the national language.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in the Philippines, because we have been colonized by so many countries, when we gained independence, the need for a national language arose because they believed that with the president before, Manuel L. Quezon, he believed that with a national language, we will be able to unite the country. So a language that all Filipinos could understand, will be instrumental to unite the people. So Manuel L. Quezon, our president, then said that we need to have a national language. And for Indonesia, it's Indonesia as the national language. So there were 8 major languages before in the Philippines, and these are Ilocano, Pangasinan, Pampango, Tagalog, Bicolano, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, and Waray Samarnon. So out of these 8 major languages in the Philippines, what do you think was chosen as the national language? It was Tagalog. Yeah. Lindayani said it's Tagalog, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's Tagalog. And now it turned into Filipino. So there were several revisions that instead of using Tagalog, it should already be Filipino. So the establishment of a national language is that it became the language of instruction in the educational system. And you could still use English and other regional languages, but then the language of instruction should be mainly in Filipino. And that is the reason why I also know how to speak Filipino, because we were required to learn the national language. Because when you go to the capital of the country, which is Manila, they are talking in Filipino. So you couldn't understand them if you do not know how to speak Filipino. So that is what we call national language. And the third one, why are we multilingual? Because of immigration and intermarriage. So immigration could be said as one of the primary factors of the dramatically increasing number of cultures in the Philippines. So in the midst of a melting pot of culture, a plethora of languages and dialects are naturally evident. So many people are now coming to live in the Philippines. So one of the coldest cities in the Philippines, Baguio, there are so many Korean students. And then in Manila, there are so many Chinese stores. In our place, we have several Korean restaurants and Chinese people now. Because of immigration and them marrying Filipinos, they bring with them the language. So the Filipinos learn the language of the people that they marry coming from different countries. So when you go to the Philippines, it's not just Filipinos living in here, but there are so many nationalities. And of course, we need to learn their language as well in order to understand them. And they too needs to learn the language that we have so that they could communicate better with us. So the next one is that there are also so many Filipinos who are by virtue are interracial, mobile, and global. So they have businesses abroad and that they are sent to, for example, in other countries for their education. And that is the reason why they learn certain languages on places they go to. And then the last one, not the last one, but the third to the last is technological advancement. So because of the internet, right? If you want, for example, to learn the Japanese language, you attend school, and what else do? Do you also search the internet or YouTube?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? We have so many applications now using our phone, or when you, for example, search it up on YouTube, you already have so many videos in there which will teach you about a certain language. And that is the reason why we are multilingual. Look at this ones. So how do our children, or how do kids in the Philippines learn English? You know, the students here in the Philippines, or the kids, because somehow their parents are working and they usually leave their children with tablets or phones and like that. They watch Peppa Pig, they watch Coco Melon, they watch Blippi, which are English YouTube channels. And because of that, they adopt the words in the English language. And we're just so amazed that when we hear them, 2 years old, 3 years old kids who are speaking in English, the parents, did not teach them, but the YouTube videos did. So because of technological advancement, we learn another language. And even in the Philippines, we have what we call your MTB MLE program, which is the mother tongue-based multilingual education. So from kindergarten to grade 3, the children are taught using their mother tongue. So why is it important that in the educational system, they need to make use of the native tongue? So children are being taught in their native tongue. For example, here in our province, our native tongue is Ilocano. So from the early stages, kindergarten until grade 3, the way on how they're taught is using the Ilocano language. So which means that you need to learn Ilocano, and then later on you need to learn Filipino, and then you also need to learn English, because these are the mediums of instruction. So that makes it 3 already, right? You need to learn Ilocano, you need to learn the national language, and you need to learn English, because that's the medium of instruction when you go to college or in other levels. The next reason is English only policy. I'll take you to Mariano Marcos State University now. So the English only policy in 2020, MMSU adopts English as medium of communication. It has been a long time that English is the medium of instruction. But what MMSU wants is that when you communicate, even outside the classroom, is English. So why do we speak in English? Because it's a policy in the university. It's not just for the classroom, but it is also needed that when you communicate with other people, you need to make use of the English language. And why is that? According to our president, the university's response to result of recent surveys and studies, which shows a decline in the English proficiency of Filipino students. So that the capability of speaking English is deteriorating, and our president was alarmed. That is the reason why she said that we need to have the English-only policy in the university. But then, there's no discrimination with the other languages, because we still are engaging people. Inclusion, diversity, and multilingualism through academic, culture, and research activities are still being conducted, which means that any language is still embraced, but somehow in official communications, please use the English language. We are still inclusive because we have a Center for Ilocano and Amyanan Studies. We have Sentro ng Wika at Kultura, which are all about embracing Ilocano, Filipino, and other foreign languages. So aside from English, we also embrace other languages aside from that. So which we're now about to end with our discussion because we are now on the effects and implications of multilingualism. So I won't take long with this discussion. So what are the different effects of multilingualism to the Philippine society? So there are so many in general, but I would like to just focus on these two important aspects, which is TransLanguaging and code switching. So because we are multilingual, what's the effect of which? So we have what we call TransLanguaging. It is when a multilingual person's full linguistic repertoire is used and honored instead of trying to keep narrowly focused on a single language. And in order to explain that, I would like to cite a certain example here. When a student can think of a word in English and substitutes the Japanese equivalent instead, and a partner comes up with the word in English the first student was looking for, they are translanguaging. Again, I repeat. So for example, you are translating in your first language is Japanese. And then you are trying to translate something in English and you cannot find the right word for that English term. Somebody tells you, this is the English equivalent of that Japanese word, then you are doing what we call translanguaging. So which means that you can think in both languages. So which is opposed to what we call code switching, but we are going to talk about that later on. So how is translanguaging evident? We have what we call linguistic landscape in the Philippines. When we talk about linguistic landscape, it talks about the display of language in public areas, for example, in commercial signs. So that is how we define linguistic landscapes. Signages, for example, in public areas. So you see in here, we have what we call ang payment center ng bayan. So ang payment center ng bayan, payment center is English, but ang and ng bayan are in Filipino. So if you're going to roughly translate that, it means, or it will be translated in English as the payment center of the town. So you see in here that there is a combination of English and Filipino language. And even, for example, in the signage of a pharmaceutical company here in the Philippines, Mercury Drug. So that's English. But then the tagline is in Filipino, nakakasiguro gamot ay laging bago, which is translated in English as, you can be ensured that this medicine is always new. So that's the rough translation of which. So you see, when we put signages, it's not just in English, but a combination of different languages. So aside from that, we have what we call another effect of multilingualism is that we usually code switch, or we alternate the use of languages, or we put or insert an English language in our utterance. So in here, you could see, pupunta ka ba sa church mamaya, which is Filipino or Tagalog. It's translated as, are you going to church later? So church is English, but the others, pupunta ka ba and mamaya, are in the Tagalog or Filipino language. So you see in the middle of the utterance, we put an English word. But we have a Filipino term for church, simbahan. Pupunta ka ba sa simbahan mamaya? Supposedly. But sometimes we do not use that and say, pupunta ka ba sa church mamaya? So there's an insertion of an English term, but we also have Filipino term for that. So we also have tag questions. For example, you know how to go there, di ba? So you know how to go there is English, and then the tag question is in Filipino. So we have an English utterance at the beginning of which, and then you have a Filipino tag question in the end. So in English, diba could be the tag question, don't you? You know how to go there, don't you? But instead of saying don't you, we use a tag question or an expression in Filipino, diba? So that is how these are some of the effects of multilingualism. Because we know several languages, there are possibilities that we do code switching, in which we make use of certain other words from different languages in our utterances. So we now proceed to the summary, and I'll be asking several questions from here. So we already have defined what multilingualism is. Now, can you give me at least one causes of multilingualism in the Philippines? So anybody from the group, if you listen to my discussion, can you give me at least one cause of the multilingualism in the Philippines? Anybody from the group?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
I think-
Liliani?
I think one of the reason is because the colonialism.
Ah, yeah, correct. Congratulations, a clap for that, Lindiani. So one of the causes is colonialism, or the colonization of the Philippines. So can you give me another name of a classmate?
I don't know, ma'am. Maybe I'm go with Wulandari.
Olandari, okay. Olandari, are you here?
Yeah,
Can you give me one of the causes of multilingualism in the Philippines, please? Hello?
technological advancement.
Pardon, can you repeat that for me, please?
Technological advancement.
That's correct. Very good. So I think you really listened to my discussion. So aside from colonization or colonialism, we also have technological advancement. One last. Walandari, can you give me one classmate who has not recited yet a while ago? Can you give me a name? I think Wulandari is afraid to give a name. That's why I'll just call somebody from the class. Can I hear from Andy Prasetya?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give me one more cause of multilingualism in the Philippines aside from those that were mentioned already? Technological advancement and colonialism?
The one is MTB and MLE program, like that.
Yes, correct. Very good, Andy. So the MTB-MLE, which is the mother tongue-based or multilingual education program in the Philippines, in which we need to study our native or make use of our native language in teaching students. So aside from those, we have others such as intermarriage and immigration, and the English-only policy here in our university. And the effects and implications of which would be we are translanguaging or making or thinking using other languages. And then we are also code switching or code mixing. We insert some other words from foreign languages into our utterances, or we switch from one particular language to another. So it's also evident in the linguistic landscapes in the Philippines or in our signages. So sometimes there are Filipino terminologies, and then they have a translation at the bottom of which is in our native tongue or even in our official language. So as I end, I would like to encourage you. You see in here a meme. What's your superpower? I'm a bilingual. I'm a multilingual. Why do we consider it as a superpower? Because it says in here, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. That means that if you know more languages, you will know more of the world, because language is culture. So when you're learning the Japanese language, you're also learning their culture and learning more about the world. So that means that being a multilingual is a superpower, which means that when you go to other places, you could understand and communicate with them. And you will be able to understand more of the world if you know the language that other people speaks. So I encourage you with this particular lecture that we had this afternoon, that you continue learning the language that you're learning right now, which is Japanese. And maybe some other time or in your free moments, you could also try learning other languages. So I'm trying to learn Korean, and I also want to learn Japanese, but they are so hard to learn. So I hope that I can have more time learning these languages. So the limits of your language is the limit of your world. So learn more languages so that you could understand more about the world. So let me just share to you, most of my topics were based from these references. I have provided Dr. Eva with my presentation, but I think I failed to include this particular part of the presentation. So you could just screenshot this, or it's being recorded, so you could go back to these references. So I think that would be it. Thank you for listening this afternoon. And my email address is dapastor@mmsu.edu.ph. Just in case you have other questions for me after our discussion or Q&A or question and answer later on. So I'll stop sharing screen, and thank you very much everyone for listening.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, Miss Danica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Very
Miss.
much,
Very
Miss.
much, Miss.
Thank you very much,
Okay.
Miss.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much, Miss Danica, for giving such an informative and interesting presentation. We will now open the discussion section. So, is there anyone want to ask something to Miss Danica regarding the PowerPoint maybe, or it can be anything related with multilingualism in Philippines particularly? Or you want to know something about the Philippine and the language, I mean Tagalog or something? Please raise your hand. Oh, we have Lulindayani. Maybe we can have 2 questions. So Lulindayani, and we can have 1 more. Who else? Okay, we have Dian Chandra Devi. Okay, please, Lindayani, yo. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the time. So I would like to ask, oh my God. I have one question about maybe in Filipino or Tagalog have some sort of respect language. So my question is, sometimes when talk in Tagalog or Filipino, maybe have some like English, right? English first, and then in last maybe have Tagalog or Filipino. Is it because the Tagalog or Filipino word is more respectful to use? Like that, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindayani. And your question, I guess, is rooting from your knowledge about the Japanese language, because the Japanese language is a very respectful language. You have san, I think, putting at the end of the names of people. So you have so many parts of the language of Japanese that shows respect. So just like what you have said, maybe there are certain words in the Tagalog language that are put at the end of the sentences to show respect, and you are correct with that. So the Filipino language is also a very respectful language because we have words such as po or opo. Okay, so we have po and opo. So you usually use this with people who have higher ranks from us compared to us, or those who usually are older than us. For example, if you did not hear what another person say, or a senior citizen, for example, the term or the sentence would be, maghugas ka nga ng pinggan, and that is, please wash the dishes, and you didn't hear it, and say, po, ano nga po iyon? Po, ano nga po iyon? So po is a respectful part of the Tagalog language, po and opo. For example, maghugas ka na, o clean the dishes, opo. So that's equivalent to yes, but in a respectful manner. So it's yes, but in Filipino, it's yes, which is respectful. It's not just oo, because yes in Filipino is oo. But when you're showing respect, it's opo. All right. So that's how it's. So we have also words like that in the Filipino language. Po and opo, which is very familiar. So if you don't use opo and po for people who are older than you, then they will say to you, oh, you're not respecting your elders. All right. So thank you very much, Linda Yani, for that wonderful question.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Linda Yani. And now is Chandra. Question from Chandra.
Yes, thank you for Tim. Before that, my name is Dian. I want to ask one question to Miss Miss Hanna. As you mentioned before, one of causes in multilingualism in Filipino, there is in immigration and intermarried, right? So there is some nation in Filipino. My question is, in Filipino, how do people implement positive psychology in a multilingual context to avoid misunderstanding? Thank you.
Can I please again can you please repeat the last part of your question? Did I hear psychology in your in your question? How can
Okay. My question is, in Filipino, how do people implement positive psychology in a multilingual context to avoid misunderstanding?
How do Filipinos implement? I wasn't able to hear the word clearly. Implement blank in order to avoid miscommunication. Could you please?
Yes. How do people in Filipino? How do people implement positive psychology in multilingual context to avoid misunderstanding?
Positive. What's the next word to that?
Yes.
Can you put it in the chat box, please? Positive
psychology.
Psychology. Did I?
Dian, can you repeat the question?
Yes. In Filipino, how do people implement positive psychology in multilingual context to avoid misunderstanding?
All right. Did I hear it, Dr. Eva, correctly? I have put in the chat box in there positive psychology. So if I have listened to it correctly from Dian, how do Filipinos implement positive psychology in order to avoid misunderstanding? So with that, what do you mean by positive psychology? Because when we talk about psychology, it means something regarding the mind, from the word psych or psyche. So can you enlighten me more, Dian, on what do you mean by positive psychology?
Yes, for example, is exercise smiling that can it can make trigger distinct response in people from different cultures.
Responding to people in different
Like,
Closure?
I'm sorry, Dian, do you mean something like a positive, doing a gesture, like smiling and
Yes,
doing
yes,
the some kind of body gesture to
yes.
avoid a misunderstanding? Is that what you
Misunderstanding.
want to ask?
Yes.
Okay.
That is that man.
Okay. So, Miss Danica, is there any like gesture in Tagalog maybe, which can imply something to when you want to like when there was a misunderstanding, and then you can use that gesture. I mean, we will not just use words, but maybe some kind of body gesture to express what we actually want to say. Is there anything like that in Tagalog? Like special body gesture, or maybe you can like inform us like some kind of body gesture which was often used by people in Philippines. Hello, Miss Danica.
Pasensya in its rough translation is be patient. Pasensya, patience. But it is also translated as I'm sorry. So pasensya na po kayo. I'm so sorry. I did not mean to do that or to say those things. So when greeting, we just usually wave our hands to the other person. We don't greet like the Japanese that we do bowing and the like, but we just wave. And then when we say something, we just somehow overlap our hands together and then say, I'm sorry to other people. So I guess that's one of the gestures that we have to show respect, or in order to inhibit miscommunication from other people. And I guess we need to learn more about these nonverbal symbols, because some may be appropriate to our culture but not to others. So some would appreciate an eye contact when talking with one another, but some other countries find it rude when you are maintaining eye contact with another person, most especially when they are of higher authority than us or than yours. So I hope that I was able to somehow answer your question, Dian, but I'm willing to have more conversations with you so that I could clarify even more your question.
Thank you so much.
So thank you, Dian and Ms. Danica, and also Lina Yani for the question also. So I think we still have a lot to talk about actually, but because of the time, the limited time, so maybe for today, maybe we can close the question and answer session just for now. But later on, maybe our students and you can still be friends, maybe via social media. Miss Danica, is it possible?
Yes, ma'am, sure. So I have also an FB page. So my name on screen is also my name on Facebook if you have one. So we can be friends in there if you don't want the formal way of communication, which is through my email. So you can search my name on Facebook and then send me a message. Just tell that you're from the class of Dr. Eva.
I heard Facebook is very popular in Philippines. I mean, they even more popular. The Facebook message was even more popular compared with WhatsApp. Is that true?
That's true, Dr. Eva. We don't actually use WhatsApp in the Philippines. I just use WhatsApp because of internationalization purposes, just like communicating with you in Indonesia. But before that, I haven't downloaded WhatsApp before because, in Philippines, Facebook really is one of the most popular social media. And according to news, we are one of the heaviest users of Facebook in the world.
Wow. So that's
Yes.
why, I mean, when I'm contacted with some of Filipinos friends, when I send a file or anything, it was always, please send it via my Facebook Messenger. And I was like,
Yes.
huh? Facebook Messenger. I mean, that's because they use it very often there.
Yeah. What social medias are popular in your country, doctor?
Oh, what social media is popular? Maybe my one of my student can answer. Maybe who can answer? How about Ariasti? Ariasti, can you answer?
Do you have Instagram?
Instagram.
Yes.
So
Oh.
according to Ariasti, it's Instagram. How about Nova? Nova, what do you think? What is the most
TikTok.
popular?
TikTok.
Okay, so Nova says TikTok. What about Deva? Deva,
Yeah, sensei.
what's the social media that you use most often? Maybe WhatsApp, Facebook, or anything else?
WhatsApp aja sensei.
Okay,
WhatsApp.
so WhatsApp is very popular here actually, especially for the chatting
Yeah.
option. Yeah. Okay, anyone else? No, maybe this.
Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter. Oh,
Twitter,
so,
Twitter.
okay.
Yes.
So Edo says Twitter.
You know, doctor, Twitter is used by our students for rants. That is where they put their hurtful comments. Our
Okay.
students use Twitter to post their personal grudges about other people and the like. So I
Yay.
don't download Twitter because sometimes there are more negative things that I see there compared
Okay.
to the positive ones. I
So
don't know if that's the case with your students. I don't know, but that's how it works here in the Philippines.
I don't know where they run. I mean, where will they? If you want to just say something bad, maybe like complaining something, where will you put it? How about I'm asking Nita?
Yes.
Do we Nita? Oh, maybe who? Anom? Anom, you want to tell something?
Yes, I think there's something that a lot of people talk negatively from the trendings, just like I see from Indonesia about hashtag, just like that, hashtag turun presiden.
Anom, if you want to say something bad, maybe about your lecturer, maybe about me, maybe about another student, where will you put it? Or will you put it on the social media?
Well, just like a post like a chat, that's something bad, just like, well,
Will you put it on social media or not?
Yes. Make
Where?
it a viral.
Which social media? We have WhatsApp story maybe, or maybe
at Twitter.
Twitter,
Okay.
see, it's Twitter.
Okay then. Okay, that's a new information for me. I don't know the kids ran on Twitter.
But
Okay.
Twitter is popular with that purpose.
Okay then. Okay, so maybe be careful of Twitter then.
Let's download some of our teachers who use Twitter, doctor, usually are telling me, oh, some of our students are complaining about this and that.
Okay.
So they have a post in the Twitter, and since I don't have one, they just screenshot the post and then they send it to me.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay. So that the pros and cons of social media. Yeah.
True.
Okay then. So dear students, we have finally come to the end part of this lecture. Before we close the session, I would like to take the conclusion from what Ms. Danica has presented. So we have learned how to understand bilingualism and multilingualism and how to differentiate them, causes of multilingualism such as colonization, establishment of national language, immigration, yeah. And the last part is about the effects and implications of multilingualism. So I would like to thank you so much for our guest lecture today for the informative and interesting presentation, and also all the students for your active participation. I hope this guest lecture will be beneficial for everyone. So we have learned something new today, which was very interesting and refreshing for us. And Ms. Danica, maybe before we close the guest lecture, is there anything you want to tell us?
Thank you very much. Again, I would like to express my gratitude, most specifically to Dr. Eva for allowing me to be a guest lecturer in her class. And I also would like to thank all of our students who have participated here this afternoon. Thank you for answering my question and being active in the chat box, as well as in asking a while ago so that you could be clarified and you will be able to know more about the Philippines. So I appreciate it, and I hope that I will still see you again next time for maybe personal communication regarding the Philippines and other stuff. Thank you very much, Dr. Eva.
Thank you, Ms. Danica. So that is for our guest lecture today. Thank you for everyone. Have a nice day, and please keep in contact with Ms. Danica. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Sensei.
ma'am.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much,
Bye.
Danica.